Welcome to Let Ali Show You. And with me is Mahmood OD, author, activist, Palestinian British. And we'll be talking about the clashes between Afghan Taliban and Pakistani security forces along the so-called Durand Line that divides these two countries. But first, Mahmood, thank you so much. It's been a while since since we last spoke. And I always say this is between Palestine and Pakistan. The occupation of Palestine is directly tied to the imperial imposition of order in Pakistan. Pakistan, as you know, has had a military rule-laden history. 60 years of its 80-year history has in some way or the other been the result or manipulated by military rule. Currently, the country is, at least on the face of it, has a facade of democracy, but it's a de facto military rule. Rights have been quashed. The courts have been completely destroyed and usurped by the executive. There are thousands of people that are in prison without charge. There are civilians have been tried in military courts, and specifically 2 provinces of the 4 in the country have been targeted with human rights abuses, disappearances, abductions, and even killings. One of these is the border province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which borders Afghanistan. And right now, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit, maybe you can ask me a question, we can talk about this as well. We are seeing
absolutely.
We're seeing what is happening in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, in Gaza. But there's also a bigger conflict that is brewing now between Afghanistan and Pakistan on one side, between India and Pakistan on the other. And there seems to be American intervention of some sort, that the Americans are, entertaining the idea of military dictatorship in Pakistan. Donald Trump hosted a luncheon for Pakistan's military ruler, Asim Munir, a few months ago in June, end of May or June, I think. And the Americans are quite interested in exploring minerals and precious stones and gems in Pakistan. And the Pakistanis, allegedly, according to a Financial Times report, have offered a port to the Americans in Balochistan, close to where the Chinese are operating. So it's a huge mess. What are your
a couple of questions would arise here. I think number one, and you would be much better positioned to give a bit more feedback about that. Why are the tensions happening on these borders between Pakistan and Afghanistan when many of the people on both sides of these borders are actually related in many cases and belong to the same tribes? What's causing that even?
Well, this is a primary question, right? And it has to do with the US war on terror in Afghanistan. The US invasion, if you can call it, of Afghanistan, or the war in Afghanistan, was the longest American war in its history. It was longer than Vietnam. The Americans stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years. And a lot of their presence in Afghanistan had to do with complicity of the Pakistan military leadership, which was at that time led by the former Pakistan dictator Pervez Musharraf. So in 2001, when the 9/11 attacks happened, the Americans called up the Pakistanis and called up Musharraf and told him, listen, you're either with us or against us. And Musharraf, to the long-term detriment of Pakistan, chose to be with the Americans. What did that mean? It meant that the Americans made the Pakistan military basically a mercenary force to carry out its own ideas, its own operations in Pakistan's then federally administered tribal areas. As you rightly mentioned, Pakistan and Afghanistan share the longest border with each other, and they have tribes on either side. For example, half a tribe in Afghanistan or the tribal areas there, and the Pakistani side in Waziristan, North, South Waziristan, so on and so forth. And these borders are porous. So people can go from one side to the other. When the Americans entered Afghanistan, it was the beginning of an insurgency. They drove out the Taliban, and many of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda crossed the border into Pakistan's tribal areas and sought refuge there. From there, they started an insurgency, and the Pakistanis have gone on record to admit this as well, where the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were providing a backup of sorts from the Pakistani side, and they were enabling the launching of attacks against the Americans on the Afghan side. The Americans then compelled the Pakistanis to send their military into these tribal areas, starting in 2002. And that was the beginning of military operations in these areas. But you have to remember, because there's such long-standing ties between these two, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the tribal areas there, what came out was that the Pakistanis basically were turning a blind eye or couldn't do much. They were carrying out military operations on one side, but then they had to basically get these people on board as well. That gave birth to the idea of the good Taliban and the bad Taliban. The good Taliban, in the Pakistani perspective, were the ones that were fighting against the Americans in Afghanistan. The bad Taliban were the ones that started fighting against the Pakistanis after they entered into these tribal areas because of the Americans. And the Americans paid the Pakistanis handsomely. They gave up to $22 billion, according to the Americans themselves, as part of something called the Coalition Support Fund. The Coalition Support Fund from the Americans for the Pakistanis to be part of this global war on terror essentially made the Pakistanis a mercenary force. And then we had instances where the Americans were then targeting the Pakistanis directly, leading up to, in fact, Osama bin Laden being caught in Abbottabad. Now, you can argue what happened there. What was OBL doing in Abbottabad? Who got him there? Were the Americans involved? Were the Pakistani military involved?
Was it him? Was it an actual thing? Was it real? I mean, I have a lot of questions personally.
There are a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions.
To add one thing, if I may, in relation to the Pakistan, at the time, many were saying that Pakistan was playing a two-side game. Is that true? They were pretending to be fighting against them to get that money, but really and truly they weren't very effective. Like the Haqqani network, for example, that was operating from within Pakistan, and now he's in effect in the leadership of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and also removed from the supposed terror list that the United States has. So he was being protected. Were those tribes protecting them, or did Pakistan also turn a blind eye?
Well, the Pakistanis and the Haqqani network and the patron of the Haqqani network, Jalaluddin Haqqani, were in bed with the Americans against the Soviets in the 1980s. So the Soviet Union, when it occupied Afghanistan beginning in the late 1970s, basically opened up an opportunity for the Pakistani generals to liaise with the Americans and invite them in. And they said that we will fight your war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And the people that Pakistan basically put forward were these tribal people, or from the tribal areas, like the Haqqanis, like Jalaluddin Haqqani, who became a war hero in the Soviet times. And including, for example, Ahmad Shah Massoud, who became a leader of the Northern Alliance. So all of these, or Hikmatyar, who was paid by the ISI as well. So the Americans, through the Saudis, would give the Pakistanis money, and then the Pakistanis would give this money to their favorite freedom fighters, like Jalaluddin Haqqani, like Hikmatyar, like, to an extent, even Ahmad Shah Massoud. So this relationship goes back 40, 45, 50 years. And it's not easy for Pakistan to just say, okay, you know what, the relationship is over. In fact, a lot of the madrasas from which this new army of Allah was created against the Soviet Unions were in Pakistan, were in places like Khatak, where the seminary, Haqqaniya seminary, was producing thousands of graduates who would then go on to fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And then this continued, because once the relationship is set, once the Americans came in after 9/11, these same seminaries were sending their students to fight against the Americans. You were mentioning the Haqqanis. I've interviewed Anas Haqqani, who was in Bagram for, I think, 5 or 6 years, and he was tortured by the Americans there. He's the youngest brother. His elder brother, Sirajuddin Haqqani, so basically there were 8 or 9 brothers. Most of these brothers were killed in drone strikes or bomb attacks by the Americans or their proxies. So, and basically the Haqqanis then had to employ the use of martyrdom brigades, their suicide squads, to turn the tide against the Americans starting from 2004 onwards. And allegedly, they had the patronage of some levels of the Pakistan military, allegedly, even though the Pakistan military denies this. But this double game, as you call it, and it was a double game, caught on with the Pakistanis, leading up to something called Salala. There was an attack in Salala, I think, at the end, not at the tail end of the American occupation, but around the time that Osama bin Laden was killed. And dozens of Pakistani soldiers were killed by American Apache helicopters and American soldiers on the Pakistan side. So this deep level of mistrust between the Pakistanis and the Americans has persisted because both the Americans and the Pakistanis have been playing a double game. It's a transactional relationship. There is no strategy or long-term benefit involved. You pay the Pakistanis and you get what you want. And then the Pakistanis play their own games because they feel a sense of betrayal. Oh my God, why aren't they giving us more? Right? So it's about money and it's about the military. Pakistan right now is in the grips of arguably the worst military dictatorship, which is not a military dictatorship because on the face of it, it's still a democracy. But on the inside, all state institutions, all democratic institutions, including human rights, has been quelled, has been destroyed. And interestingly, with the patronage of both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, because the Biden administration turned a blind eye because of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. It allegedly sponsored the removal of Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who is in prison now for over 2 years. Nobody's seen him except his lawyers and the court proceedings that are being held in jail. This is being done at the acquiescence and the silent agreement of the Americans, allegedly, because the Americans have not said a single thing about human rights and human rights violations. And what is interesting is that Imran Khan was put in prison in August 2023. The October 7th attacks happened 2 months later. Pakistan's position on the October 7th attacks has been, as you can see, because they nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. If you remember, for ending the war between the 4-day war or skirmish between India and Pakistan. So the military junta is in bed with the Americans. The American deep state, specifically, allegedly, the CIA and the State Department under Marco Rubio, are in cahoots with the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis were providing with the Americans allegedly mortar shells and artillery shells in Ukraine to fight against the Russians. Imran Khan was removed because he landed in Russia on the day that the Russians invaded Ukraine, which was then used as an excuse by the military leadership then, General Bajwa, former Chief of Army Staff, to basically tell the Americans, listen, we are with you. As in the Pakistan army is with you, America. It is these fundamental anti-American politicians like Imran Khan. Look, and he went on the day. So this game, this manipulation has been going on for a long time. And both the Americans and the Pakistanis are okay with it because the Americans want to deal with a strong man. They don't want to deal with this democratic BS of, oh, pass a law, do this, do that. Their interests trump every consideration for human rights, for democracy, for whatever in places like Pakistan. Because they probably, I think, view Pakistanis as savages, as something that can be controlled and manipulated and suppressed. But Pakistan is 250 million people. And Pakistan is the only nuclear armed state, a Muslim state in the world. So Pakistan is a very, very important country. It has a largely young population, but it is also a country under extreme subjugation of American American-backed colonial designs that are being carried out by a military junta that is extremely aggressive, extremely predatory, and extremely subjugative of the Pakistani population. And what you see in Pakistan with these terrorist attacks, with what's happening with the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, the skirmishes, is a result of the military junta's complete disregard for human rights, for democracy, for the rule of law, complete subjugation of anyone for Gaza, for example, there are people lying in prison for months now because they were protesting against Israel and for the Palestinians in Gaza. And this all has the backing of the military junta. In fact,
in prison in Pakistan, you mean?
Yes, in Pakistan. In Pakistan,
so the escalation that's now happening on the border, you're telling me as well, is related to these people resisting the military rule from within Pakistan, but that expanded to Afghanistan. And for whose interest would they want to go against Afghanistan then?
There are a few things that have happened here, Mahmood. In the past year, the Pakistan military caught the alleged mastermind of the Abbey Gate bombing in Kabul. The Abbey Gate bombing in Kabul happened in the last week of the American withdrawal, in which 13 American soldiers were killed at the entrance or the back entrance of the Kabul airport. This is around August 2021. The Pakistanis caught the alleged mastermind for the Abbey Gate a few months ago and handed him over to the Trump administration. Trump, in his first State of the Union address, thanked Pakistan for handing over this terrorism suspect. Pakistan's military leader right now, General Asim Munir, had very close ties with the former CENTCOM chief, General Eric Michael Kurilla, who stepped down a few months ago. Yeah, and Kurilla was also Israel's favorite general. Kurilla promoted Pakistan's military dictator as a man who is against terrorism. Because whenever you talk about the Pakistani military and the Americans have a set framework in their mind, Pakistan military will fight our terror wars. Starting from against the Soviets to against the Americans themselves, the Taliban themselves. So the Pakistani military has carried out a series of steps inside Pakistan over the past year, including the removal of tens of thousands of Afghan nationals who were born in Pakistan because their forefathers escaped or grandparents escaped during the Soviet wars. They were born here. They don't have Pakistani citizenship or passports. They deported them back to Afghanistan, creating even more resentment. And they started to create a hard border. Now, because the border region and obviously the KP province is kind of complicated here, and I think it'll be beneficial for your viewers and my viewers. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is arguably the only province in Pakistan which still has a democratic mandated government. In the elections in February 2024, there was mass rigging, according to the Commonwealth report, which was also suppressed. The only province where rigging or there wasn't a mandate theft was Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa borders Afghanistan. People in KP have relations with people in Afghanistan. So a crackdown has been underway essentially in KP for the past year against political dissidents, which has now spread into this conflict that has emerged because all of these things are tied. Imran Khan, at the time when the Americans were leaving, made a few controversial statements. He said, we cannot have war with Afghanistan. We cannot have war with our own people. But right now, there's a military operation underway since March in which Pakistani civilians, including children, have been killed in drone attacks allegedly carried out by Pakistan's military. The terminology that is being used is the same as Israel was using in Gaza. And if you look at the terminology the Pakistanis are using against the Afghans, it's the same terminology, the same mindset that these are terrorists, that if you give shelter to a terrorist, there'll be collateral damage. So there are a lot of parallels that are going on. The root of these parallels connects to the Americans and American patronage of both these systems of oppression, be it in Afghanistan or Pakistan in this instance, or be it in Israel or the Palestinian occupied territories.
It's so interesting. What do you think is coming out of it, though? That's the more dangerous question. I mean, the last thing you'd want is a war now between these two countries. Even when we speak about military dictatorships or internal corruption or anything of the sort, there's also another dimension to look at, which is the greater geopolitical scope. And also the interest of the United States having an establishment there against China, or also potentially, and again, I'd be interested to hear what you have to think about that. The promise that the Iranian general of the IRGC at the time mentioned that if Israel attacks Iran with a nuclear bomb, Pakistan will drop a nuclear bomb on Israel. How are all of these linked? What's the reality behind them? And do you think it will reach to an escalation where both countries will go at war with each other, knowing really and truly the impossibility of defeating Afghanistan? I mean, Afghanistan, we call it in Arabic, Maqbaratul Ghuza, the graveyard of empires. It has been known in history as a land that cannot be occupied. The Soviets failed, the Americans failed. What can Pakistan do? What are they going to go and occupy Afghanistan? What are they going to do? What's the outcome out of it? What do you think of all of that?
A few things here. I was talking about terminology. I just want to make a very quick point. The situation is such that there was a mandate theft in Pakistan. And if you raise a voice against it, you are labeled as a anti-state sympathizer, either an Afghan Fitna al-Khawarij or a PTI Imran Khan supporter. Anyone who raises his voice against the subjugation and the military dictatorship in force in Pakistan right now is accused of the same way that Israel would accuse someone of being a Hamas sympathizer or a Hamas supporter or anti-Semitic. So the terminologies are very similar here. 45%, I wouldn't say, about 45 million Pakistanis are Pashto speakers. 60% of Afghanistan speaks Pashto. Pakistan has 5 different languages. Or actually, it could be more if you count the dialects. There's Saraiki, there's Punjabi, there's Pashto, there's Sindhi, there's Balochi, there's Hindko, and so on and so forth. The majority of Pakistanis are Punjabi speakers. Punjab is the largest province. 60% of Punjab is accounts for 60% of the Pakistani population. What has happened over the past few years, and this has been patronized by the military leadership as well, is that we want to frame anyone who opposes the military junta, and especially if they come from a KP province, as Afghans, as hidden Afghans who are against the Pakistani state. And this is also playing out, by the way, in the whole Afghanistan-Pakistan dynamic. Because in KP province, you have people that say, we don't want war with Afghanistan. They are automatically accused of being, oh, see, there's a traitor right there. He's an Afghan sympathizer. And because he's an Afghan sympathizer, Imran Khan is also anti-state. So there's a lot of juxtaposition. There's a lot of hearsay and a lot of BS that is put forward just for resistance or resisting this. Another thing, Israel has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. You were mentioning Afghanistan. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia just recently signed a mutual defense pact. What that means is that if one country is attacked, the other country will respond to it. And this happened right after Israel carried out strikes in Qatar, where they targeted Hamas leadership, which was meeting for negotiations. So the myth that was spread in Pakistan is, look, Israel is attacking countries in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are getting into this agreement because of Israel. Because Pakistan can come to Saudi Arabia's defense if it is attacked by Israel. Now, Israel has never attacked Saudi Arabia. Israel has not even, in fact, threatened Saudi Arabia. And the entire Saudi defense architecture is based on an American defense architecture. They've got Patriots, they've got American fighter jets, bombers, you name it. In fact, up until the 90s, they also had the largest American base. So any pact or any agreement between the Pakistanis and the Saudis, especially based on defense, cannot happen without the approval of the Americans. And if the Americans are involved, you can bet, be sure that it is not targeted against Israel. It is targeted against possibly Iran, but also China. Because America, as
do you think that they can have this much of a compromise after China arms the Pakistani military so heavily, and they have proven to be so effective against India, and they have visibly a very good relationship, and they're close to China, and they know what they're capable of? And also, they apparently also have closer ties with Iran too. As a matter of fact, I heard a conversation between some of the Pakistani officials and the Saudi officials in somewhat of a reassurance to Iran that it wasn't intended against them. What do you think about that? And of course, in general, there could be a viewing here that, well, they did it as a surprise, but the Americans would have known somehow. Now, were they the architects behind it? Were they the engineers? Is a separate story. But can they go that far for something against China, potentially, that's closer to their borders and also arms them heavily and has a very long trade with them, and geographically and the proximity makes way more sense than the United States? Are they willing to go that far, you think?
Anything for survival. The Pakistanis, and especially the Pakistani, because it's not a representative country, it's a divided country and it has a history of military rule. Military interests trump the people's interests. You are absolutely right. China is our neighbor. It has given Pakistan weapons, but the Pakistanis are also offering the Americans ports right next to where the Chinese have been building, for example, the Gwadar port or something called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So because the regime in Pakistan right now, after stealing the mandate, completely destroying the courts, is so alienated, is so isolated among the people, the Pakistanis don't trust the leadership, the military at this moment. The majority of Pakistanis are against what the military is doing politically, in political interventions, and security-wise. 2024-2025 was the worst year on record in the past decade for Pakistani security personnel and attacks on Pakistani security personnel. When the military finds itself in a position where a dictatorial figure, be it Musharraf, be it Ziaul Haq, or be it Asim Munir, tries to usurp power, you see an uptick in these attacks, and you see a rush towards the Americans. Please give us money. What can we offer you for you to engage with us? When the Chinese give you money, they give it to you in terms of loan, and China still doesn't have the same capacity to play these games that the Americans have had. And the Americans have been playing these games in these parts for decades. But that's a very important question. Why would the Pakistanis go back to the Americans when the Chinese are right there? And this is a question I'm sure the Chinese are also asking. And in their minds, they probably say that because Pakistan plays all sides, it plays a double game, how can you trust Pakistan? And the fact is, you cannot trust the Pakistani leadership. You cannot trust the current Pakistani military junta that has taken over control of all aspects of the state, all organs of the state, and is inviting the Americans, look, we can give you minerals, rare earth minerals. We'll create a port in Pasni. You can bring your minerals here, process it, put it on a ship, and off to the US. The Chinese have seen this very closely. And now even the Chinese are hedging their bets because the Chinese realize that Pakistan is not a reliable partner. They are investing in Afghanistan. They're investing in Iran. In fact, there are talks that the Chinese might even help Iran rehabilitate the Chabahar port to bypass the Gwadar port that they were building with the Pakistanis, because you can't trust the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis want to attack you, and then they'll give you the best words, they'll be your best friends, but then they'll also attack you. And they'll do the same thing with their own people, the leadership that is. So again, you can't trust the Pakistanis. The Chinese probably don't trust the Pakistanis. There are a lot of interests that are involved in this area strategically: India, Iran, the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. And then you have the Pakistanis that are playing all these double games, including offering or nominating Trump for the Nobel Prize that he didn't win.
And in short, to summarize, where do you think it's going to go after all of this escalation? Do you think it's going to reach an all-out war with them? Between Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Listen, there cannot be an all-out war in the same sense, because the Americans were the biggest military force in the world, right? Still are. They spent $1 trillion in a year on their defense. In Afghanistan, through some estimates, the Americans spent $2.3 trillion over 20 years. with the most sophisticated weaponry, with the best arsenal in the world, you name it, with Pakistan supplies coming in from Pakistan, NATO supply lines, drones, whatever. And even then, a ragtag army of people in their slippers with guns defeated the Americans. The Pakistanis are a huge superpower or regional superpower compared to Afghanistan. They've got an air force. They get military supplies primarily from the Chinese, but they also have American fighter jets. And the Pakistanis have fought an insurgency. 70 to 80,000 Pakistanis were killed in the tribal areas in KP, in Pakistan, in suicide attacks and bombings from 2002 to 2014. And then they had to basically pull back and say, okay, you know what, you can't fight your way through anything. If Pakistan decides to go to war with Afghanistan, or these skirmishes escalate, you will open up a huge front in Pakistan because the language is the same, the people are the same. And there are a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of suppression inside Pakistan as well. We're talking about Afghanistan right now. In Balochistan, there's an insurgency. The terror groups are attacking daily. They're killing 3 to 4 to 5 Pakistani soldiers. And the Pakistanis have been fighting an insurgency there since 2007. 8,000 Balochis have been disappeared. And this is right south of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. So if you want to expand the war is expanding inside your country, inside Pakistan. So if they want to attack Afghanistan, it'll spread this violence even more, even further.
And all I can see here is really neo-colonial interests being met in having more havoc in these countries, and then potentially funding perhaps somehow both sides like they have in different wars. But then they would also destabilize both countries. I mean, Afghanistan is trying to re-emerge out, get more recognition. Could it be perhaps that the United States now got some of their final prisoners of war from Afghanistan? They say, okay, we don't care. Maybe they can go into another war. And then Pakistan would get dragged into this, which doesn't seem to be an ideal case for anyone, really, neither for the people in both countries.
Thank you so much, Mahmood. I know you spoke a lot. I'm not used to speaking.
Thank you so much.
But I appreciate the time that you took out.
Thank you.
And we will do it again. Thank you, guys. Thank you,
Absolutely.
everyone. Do like, subscribe, and share this content.